Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to warmly welcome you all for this webinar organized by the Colombo Stock Exchange. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is important to highlight that yesterday the Colombo Stock Exchange has put out an important announcement regarding the revision of its ASPI. So the Colombo Stock Exchange plans on revising the index calculation methodology of the All-Share Price Index. Let us in this webinar discuss as to how this happens, how the calculations go, and let's dig deep into why it's done and what are the impacts of this change and why the change is important. So it is another historic day in the Colombo Stock Exchange, with the ASPI now falling into an all-time high territory even today as well. So with that, let's start digging deep into this webinar. So this webinar will consist of two sections. Firstly, we will move into a presentation that explains about this revision, and then secondly, we will move into the Q&A section where we will look at answer as much as questions as possible that the investors have. So we've already received a large number of questions, and it's important to note that all our investors can even now put their questions on the Facebook site. So all you have to do is go into our Facebook site, the Colombo Stock Exchange, and under this streaming session, in the comments section, you can post your questions. So once you do that, we will take those questions up in the question and answer session. Now let's straightaway move into the presentation. Today, the presentation is done by Mr. Nishanta Hevavitarna, Head of Research and Strategy of the Colombo Stock Exchange. So I would like to now hand over to Mr. Nishanta Hevavitarna. Over to you, Nishanta.
Thank you, Dimanta. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And I eagerly wait for the Q&A session so that I can demystify your doubts. And before that, to set the context, I would like to do a very short presentation. Let me quickly share my presentation. I'm using a short presentation in that regard. And give me a second. All right, this is about, as we discussed, the proposed methodology change to the All-Share Price Index. This is what we are going to implement in the upcoming weeks. Right, the purpose of this particular revision is to change the weighting scheme from the full market capitalization to the float market capitalization or float adjusted market capitalization. As you know, current all-share price index, the constituent companies or securities rather, are weighted based on their full market capitalization. And what we are going to do is we are going to change that to the float adjusted market cap. I think that at this point itself, I would like to differentiate these two, but you are very much familiar with the full market cap. It's nothing but quantity into the price, issued quantity to price, that makes the total market cap of each company. But as you know, there is some other thing called public holding percentage that the companies would disclose every quarter. Is a percentage. It simply implies the percentage, in percentage terms, the amount of shares available for public to trade, hence the name public holding. Now, what would happen if you multiply the total market cap by this percentage? Of course, it would be the market value of the shares available for public to trade. That's why this is sometimes called free float. This is something available freely to be floated in the market. Right? And the public float, adjusted, free float, all these are synonymous. Right. What we are going to do is we are going to weight the index constituent not based on the full market cap as currently, but by the float adjusted market cap. And so what made us to do so? Why? What's the reason behind for us to do so? Of course, current ASPI, all share price index, as you know, doesn't represent the tradability of its constituents. Now, what does it mean by tradability? I know you are familiar with liquidity. Liquidity is how fast you can buy and sell. But tradability is, again, the sort of prerequisite for the liquidity. When the public float is high, of course, tradability is high, and vice versa. So this doesn't represent, current ASPI doesn't represent the tradability of shares. Why? Because no matter what the public holding is, no matter what the free float is, the calculation considers 100% of the shares. Let me take an example. Let's say we have a company with 1% public holding, 1%. However, a calculation considers 100%. However, 99% will not be available for public to trade. Those will not be going hand in hand. And therefore, the index doesn't represent the tradability. And the solution, of course, to convert this weighting scheme to a float adjusted market capitalization. That's what we are going to do in this exercise. And a couple of empirical evidences. Most markets do suffer from this issue of the tradability is not represented in the index, and therefore the index returns are not realistic. Because of this one, as a solution, almost all the markets now are moving or have moved to the float adjusted version. Now here I'm bringing a couple of examples, as you can see here, and of course by the time they start, of course they're based on the full market cap. Now they are moved later into the float market cap. A couple of evidences from the other markets. Right, now if you look at this change can be summarized into three components, three parts, three items. First one, as I mentioned, weighting scheme. Current is full market cap, and we are moving that to the float adjusted market cap. That's the change number one, or item one rather. And the other one is, when we take this one, usually there is an inherent problem in float adjusted market cap weighted indices. The single index the representation is higher, fairly high, in that we also do suffer from that, and therefore we kept that at 5%. That means by the time we construct the index, the largest company would represent say 12%, but we don't allow 12%, and we kept that at 5%, and the balance 7% is redistributed among the remaining constituents. So that index will not be dominated by a particular stock. And the technique for that one is capping. We do use capping at 5%. And of course, this is going to be weighted on public holding. And as you know, public holdings are they're disclosed by companies quarter to quarter. Of course, there would be changes. Therefore, in order to reflect those changes, this has to be changed or readjusted, which we call rebalance. Therefore, third change would be, because of this one, there's a requirement of rebalancing. Rebalancing would take place, of course, every quarter. Why? Because the latest public holding percentages are available. We should reconstruct or change the index construction in order to reflect the latest changes. And rebalancing means, of course, weight revision. And of course, this would take place 4 times a year: March, June, September, and December. So what does it mean from the user's point of view? The rebalancing means, no, you won't see any difference. You won't see any difference because the continuation would be there. Simply because of rebalancing in March, June, September, and December, you won't see or you won't observe any change from the investors' point of view. And the index construction is readjusted to reflect the latest or the most recently disclosed public holdings. And of course, same with the rebalancing, the more details are here. As you know, that there could be 4 rebalances, quarter 1, 2, 3, 4, as you can see in the first column. And of course, for that one, we are using the public holdings based on, of course, the previous quarter. For us to do the rebalancing in the quarter 1, of course, we have to use the previous quarters. That means the quarter 4 of the previous year. For Q2 rebalancing, of course, previous quarters public holding, and so on. And of course, for this one, we have chosen a specific date for this one. Always, it's the third Friday. Third Friday in the sense, not first, second, third, like Friday of the third, basically Friday of third week, and that would be the rebalance date, and it is carried out on this particular date of each month, and it will be effective since the following Monday after the third Friday of March, June, September, and December. And of course, the reference date is the date on which the data we use for the rebalancing purpose. I think this would have given you some the holistic picture of this rebalancing, because this is a new concept, right? New concept which we haven't experienced earlier. And from, again, I'm reminding from investors' point of view, of course, you don't want to bother because this reconstruction would happen from our end. But you should be aware that this is more updated, right? And we have come to the tail end of the short presentation. So what you will see in the index once it is launched, say I'm picking a date, for example, if it is launched, right? Remember this for the explanation purpose. If it is launched on, say, January 15th, so what you will see from the January 15th, you won't see any difference. Of course, you will see the continuation of the ASPI where I stopped on, say, 14th. Where I stopped on 14th, it will continue from that point onwards. There will be a continuation. If it is stopped at, again, I'm picking a number, say 12,500. This for the explanation purpose, don't catch me for that number. And if it is stopped at 12,500, of course, the following day, once it is launched, it will continue from 12,500, but calculated on different basis. Different basis is nothing but what I've been explaining. And with that note, I think I was able to fairly set the context for the discussion. And with that, I gave the control back to Dimantha. Dimantha, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Nishantha, for that insightful presentation. I hope that our investors have got a reasonable idea as to what is basically happening from the CSE point of view in relation to the ASPI, and what you can expect on the 1st of from January onwards. So let's straight away now move into the question and answer session, because we have a large amount of questions that have already come in place. So I would like to basically invite and remind our investors that you can still post your questions. So if you're listening to us from Facebook Live, all you have to do is go to the comments section and put in your question, and basically we will take it up during the discussion. So some of the questions I will be basically putting it together and asking for ease of understanding of the investors. So let's straight away move into the question and answer session. So Nishantha, I would first like to ask regarding the decision of changing the ASPI. So most investors have this question as to why so suddenly. I'm sure it's not a sudden decision. CSE has its set of processes as to how things are done. So it would be great if you can give an understanding to the public and explain as to what sort of thought process went through this, and whether it was a sudden decision, overnight decision or not, from the stock exchange point of view.
Right. Thank you. Now, when it comes to this decision, of course, it may look somewhat sudden, but when it that's an announcement, I would say. But the decision is fairly well thought decision. And of course, when it comes to this kind of index methodology revision, right? Methodology, if I may talk in generic sense, can a stock exchange take a decision to change the index methodology? Of course, it is something they cannot do that all of a sudden. Of course, it requires something called back testing. We should go back to the historical period and recalculate, or we back test or back calculate the index that we are trying to launch, or that we are planning to launch, as if we launched that long ago, say, for example, somewhere in 2013. Then, of course, as if we launch on that date, we can construct this index. Remember, now once we construct, we are left with those values, and also we are left with the actual ASPI values that we have gathered since 2013. Now we have two series, so that we can then compare and contrast and understand what the impact is. So that's the best practice in terms of index change methodologies. Of course, we also embarked on this journey somewhere in the mid of this year. Of course, it takes tremendous amount of time, because that is something that should be done very carefully, because we need to reconstruct the index. We were to deal with, based on the period that we had chosen, we were to deal with 2,000 odd corporate actions, because we need to do all the adjustments, because we are manually constructing, right? Because it's not a job of the system. We need to manually construct. And of course, once we construct, once we complete the backtesting, right, then we have we are able to understand the impact. That's why it is not a sudden decision, right? That was started somewhere in the mid of this year, and now only the announcement has come to the market, Dimanta.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Nishanta, for that detailed explanation. Then our second question is, now, is the current unnatural boost in the ASPI due to a defect in the ASPI calculation, is the question. And there's a second part to this question where it asked about the global context. Are both these methodologies still in use, or is the new methodology that is mostly and most widely used? So yeah, two questions there.
Yeah, if I may take the second part, of course. So now the latest trend, almost every market uses the float adjusted market capitalization weighting technique when it comes to index construction, and the full market cap, of course, they are perceived as old, right? And Dimanta, what was the first question about the
first question? Does the stock exchange think that there is some sort of deficiency in the current ASPI calculation? Is it taken as a defective sort of method?
Not defective, actually. That is partly because of some drawback in the float, the full market cap weighted indices like ASPI. Because for that, as I mentioned earlier, we take 100% of the issued quantity, irrespective of the public holding. Let's say that there's a company with very low public holding, and they are gaining the large return. Of course, we consider as if the entire quantity has given the large return. However, from the investor's point of view, they are not able to realize the entire gain. They can realize only what is available for the publicly trade. Therefore, it is not really reflective. Partly, of course, that is because of I would attribute partly that the gain to the some sort of a drawbacks in the index. That's what we are correcting.
Okay, okay. So basically we are going into a sort of a modern calculation methodology in the current global environment, I think. Yeah. Also, Nishanta, for our investors understanding, there is a basic question, but it's, I think, very important to understand that as well. The question is, what is a free float? So I think that is important to understand what the calculation methodology is. So if you can give a sort of a understanding to the investors on what the free float is.
Yes, right. Right, a free float. Now, when it comes to the issued quantity of a company, of course, some of these shares are held by, say, the founding owners. Can we expect them to trade that in the market in general? No, they won't do that. Say that the board of directors are holding, or the company executives are holding. Can we expect them to sell in the market? Of course, they want. They can. But if they want, they can. However, those will not be available for public to trade. So that we call them strategic holding. Now, if you can see, in the issued quantity, there are two components. One is strategic holding, other one is the public holding. That is something that is floating in the market. That is what is going hand in hand. So that we need to separate this in this issued quantity. How it is done is as a percentage, right? In a given company, the public holding, there are so many names, right? We call it public holding. And sometimes Indian context, mainly they call it free float. We also use the same name, free float. And in the global context, there is some other name, investable weighting factor, right? IWF, same thing, right? Same thing. So that is mentioned as a percentage. In a given company, if the public holding is 15%, that means the 15% of the issued quantity is available for public to trade in general. That is what is going hand in hand. Same thing can be applied for the public, the market capitalization. If we multiply the market capitalization by the public holding, that means we extract that component out, which we call float adjusted market cap. Of course, this is based on a particular definition, and you can find the definition. Investors can find the definition that is there in the listing rules. I think the very first document to be downloaded, very first document under definitions, you can see what the public holding definition is, how it is arrived, how it is calculated. And the calculation is a job of each company, and they got to calculate and disclose every quarter with their quarterly financial statement. Somewhere down the line, you will see public holding is this much as a percentage.
Thank you, Nishanta. So, talking about this listing rules, Nishanta, now there is a question. I think all these questions are coming somewhat because of some of the lower free float companies that are there in the stock market. Basically, we call them illiquid counters. So the question is now, there is a sort of a process or rule relating to free float, and but still there are a lot of these illiquid counters. So what is the sort of process in delisting or basically correcting this? I think current rules are there. If you can give a brief explanation as to these illiquid counters, what the CSE is doing regarding it. Yeah.
Yeah, Dimanta. Now, the public holding is a prerequisite for liquidity. Of course, if public holding is less, of course, then we cannot expect that particular counter to be liquid. And but this won't help them. This will not be a remedy for them. Right? This introduction of this new methodology, of course, this will be a solution for the better. I mean, the unrealistic reflection of the market returns. Exactly. And so that's if the companies are maintaining low public float, of course, that's a different one. It's a sort of enforcement action, as you said. Of course, at the very end, it might go to the even to the delistings level. And of course, we are working on a enforcement plan in that regard. And so that parallel to this one, we are working on this one as well. We are not addressing only one side. We are addressing this index matter now, and at the same time, parallel to this one, we are working on this enforcement actions as well. And you can see that probably in a couple of months.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So basically, the floating free float rules still apply, and the relevant companies have to comply by it, and otherwise there will be enforcement actions which are possibly
action. Currently, what we do is if they don't meet the requirement, as you know, there is something called continuous listing requirements. There is a public holding requirement depending on the company size. You can see that table at how they got to maintain their public holding on continuous basis. If they don't meet that, of course, then we need to notify investors, right? Investors, but the mechanism that we use is we transfer them to something called second board. So that's what we currently. Then we are working on the next step at the moment.
Yeah. So this basically addresses some sort of a problem where even watch list counters going forward will not affect the ASPI, which is a positive factor. We are moving towards that from January onwards. So let's move into the next question. Talking about the ASPI, I know during your presentation you addressed some of these issues, but for the clarity of the investors and for some people who have missed it, basically I will ask you this. Are you going to replace the current ASPI completely or continue as 3 indices? So that is the question that investors have asked. Yes, Nishant.
I'm a bit confused about the 3 indices matter. What does it mean?
I think they are referring to ASPI, S&P, and possibly a potential new.
Okay. And this exercise, right? This exercise should not be viewed as a introduction of new index. Now you may have some sense. We have compiled the index historical basis. That means we have one index, right? Of course, that is for us to understand the impact. What we do here is actually we change the methodology, right? Still, ASPI will continue. Name still would be ASPI, and of course, it's the calculation basis would be different. How different, as we discussed, is based on it will have 3 new items. It will be based on float market cap, and there will be rebalancing, and the maximum representation would be capped at 5%, right? 5%. Those are the changes, and on that basis, it will continue. Other than that, there is no discontinuation of ASPI, no introduction of new index. It's a methodology change, and of course, S&P SL20, of course, that will go. That's independent of this exercise because it's a blue chip index. Nothing to do with this. Here, what happens is, for example, even after launching, you will S&P SL20 you will see as it is, and you will still see something called ASPI, right?
Then Nishant, now let's explain this a bit more, taking into account example. Say on 31st December, the index say closes at around 11,200. Say is the closing for 31st December. So when we start the market on 1st of January, what should the investors see as the opening amount? Is it a different figure, or will it be the 11,200 itself?
Short answer, 11,200. It will continue from the same point. Simply because of this revision, you won't see any sudden shift or downward or upward shift of the index. It will continue from the same point. Now, in your example, I noted down 11,200. Of course, 11,200. Right? It will continue. Right? When you go back and see thereafter, there won't be any shift. Right? Of course, it continued, and of course, that particular day would be a historical day for the index because that would be the day we change the revise the methodology. Other than that, you won't see any difference.
Okay, okay, thanks. Then our next question is, what are the main differences, basically, the ASPI from the old index to the new index, basically, or the new methodology? What will the investors feel in the new index? I'm sure you have run the numbers over the last 6-7 years. What type of a difference do you think the investors should expect here?
Right. We ran that for 8 years, so that we had a fairly good amount of data for us to compare and understand the impact of this index. And what we mainly see is, because now this is moving based on the publicly available quantity of each share. And as a result of that, the movement or the volatility is, compared to the ASPI, it is lesser. It is lesser even after, right? However, that depends on how it is traded. If those companies are, I mean, the companies that have higher public holdings are trading aggressively, of course, then the index might go up aggressively. And compared to SPI, of course, it is, I would say, less volatile. That's the main difference that investors can see in the under the new methodology.
Okay. Then there's another question on what type of advantages or disadvantages are there if you take the two methodologies. What type of advantages, Nishanta, do you see in the new methodology?
Advantages would be, if you look at the current index, current ASPI index, yeah, one of the problem is, of course, it doesn't represent the tradability, irrespective of public holding quantity. Of course, it considers 100% of the quantity. As a result of that, of course, the returns may not be realistic. You will see a massive return, but you will not be able to realize that return because what you can buy and sell is, of course, what is available, right? That means you are able to buy and sell only the public holding quantity. But index gives a higher return having considered all the complete issued quantity. That means the full issued quantity. Therefore, the returns that it could give may not be realistic. What did I mean by not realistic? Of course, you will see, but when you try to realize that, of course, it may not be that easy. However, under the revised methodology, of course, the returns would be based on the publicly available shares. Of course, then you are able to match. You are able to probably reach that the return, and that's what is meant by the returns would be realistic. And the other one is, of course, let's say that this is for the explanation purpose, right? And someone is trying to manipulate the index. Of course, we really discourage that. Let's take an example. We have let's say we have a company with very low free float, like 1% free float. And what happens if that particular company gives a massive return? Of course, then investors are impressed about that, right? But they try to realize that what happens is, of course, they would rally around that and try to buy that company. As a result of, there will be a large or heavy buying pressure. Since the buying pressure, however, since the public holding is low, there will be a low supply. Because of that, and this will start going aggressively higher, right? And of course, this will again distort the index, right? So that if someone can choose such a thinly traded or company with low public holding, it may be somewhat easy for someone to manipulate the market if someone wants to do so, for the argument's sake. But with this one, it's not that easy. It is really discouraged, so that whatever the index that you see, it would be very realistic in that regard. So that's the biggest advantage in the new. I also tend to say new index, but it's not new index under the revised methodology. ASPI under revised methodology.
Okay. So important message from Nishanta, that is we are going more towards more ethical grounds in terms of this ASPI movement. So anyone who's looking at manipulating through illiquid counters, the index, giving a wrong picture to the general public or the foreign investors. So this is we are moving towards a more modern methodology which will tackle those aspects of dissolution basically in terms of the index. So
Yes.
Let's move into the next question. So next question is basically about the S&P SL20 index. Now what they are asking is, and if you compare the two indices, the ASPI and the S&P SL20 index, ASPI with the new calculation methodology, is it going to be the same methodology as the S&P SL20 index, or is it different?
Right. Let me get into that question this way. Now, we introduced S&P in 2012. From the inception, it has been based on a float adjusted market cap. It's not based on total market cap. As you know, it came with the, we are using for that S&P methodology. Of course, S&P index methodologies are globally accepted, credible index methodologies. Of course, they have moved into the float adjusted basis long ago. So since 2012, it has been a float adjusted market cap, right? And now we are converting our ASPI also to the same basis.
So basically, both indices will be in line with the same methodology, right?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Then there's another question on. Now we've identified here the free float as a problem in the old methodology, and we put some measures to address that problem. Now, the question is whether you have, as the stock exchange, identified some other variables as well together with that affects the ASPI biasness, which we may see future action, or is this it? I think in the presentation you mentioned a number of other variables also. You can touch on those, I think.
For the ASPI, if it is misrepresentative, that is mainly because of it considering the total market capitalization for the weighting purpose. I think weighting purpose, that's the biggest. I can say biggest flaw. Because it's fairly misrepresentative because of that. So that's the main variable. That's what we are correcting in this through this exercise. When it comes to other variables, of course, there could be other variables, but those are not that relevant for this exercise.
Yeah. But Nishant, I think you have taken some other limitations like the 5% that you have mentioned. If you can briefly touch on those also.
All right. Okay. All right. Right.
Yeah.
Those are the things coming within the index. What happens when it comes to float adjusted market cap? Imagine a situation like this. We have a very large company, and that maintains high free float as well. Say close to 98%. Say. So what would be the multiplication? Multiplication is still large, right? Still large. And as a result of that, if you put all the float adjusted market caps together, that company would stay at a very different place, because that could be very large. If you go as it is, what happens is that company would be dominating the index, because we are weighting the index constituent based on the float adjusted market cap, right? So that is identified as overconcentration issue. That is not something good, right? When in one market, of course, it would be good, but in the other market, when the market goes up, that's fantastic. Why? Then, of course, in the bear market, because we should understand that stock prices are going in cycles, right? It oscillates between its value going up and down. And if it is in a bear run, of course, it will be, and then again, there would be question. Index is not realistic, right? It doesn't represent, is dominated by some other index, So this is something, this is sort of an inherent problem in float adjusted index. That's why we have introduced, that's why there is something called capping. Under capping mechanism, we limit the maximum representation to a predetermined cap percentage. Here we have chosen 5% based on extensive back testing. Right? So that's the best cap that we can use. That's the best cap that would give the best performance in the both markets, bull and bear. Just to remind one more thing, S&P also, some of you may know this one, S&P SL20 also capped at 15%. Capped at 15%. Most out of those 20 stocks, most cases, most rebalances, and 2 are more than 15%. No, right? So that we are bringing it down, we are capping it at 15%. Of course, in this part, we capped at 5%.
Exactly. Thanks a lot, Nishant, for reminding that factor. So SLP also has a cap
Yes.
in terms of the single shareholder.
Yes.
So, so next question is a bit of a concern from one of our investors. Now, whether this recalculation or new methodology could go into a state where there is extremely low variation in the index. I think since you have run past data, you may be able to answer that question. Yeah.
I would say no. It won't go into extreme variations. Why? Because this will be moving along with the publicly available trading, publicly available content, right? Free float, because it will not be massive shift. If we take, for example, in the current index, of course, if we take when we take the total quantity, always it's up by is impacted by this the size of company. But here, this is impacted by only the publicly available portion, or in other words, float adjusted portion, which is fairly lesser. Therefore, the movements, there won't be extreme movements. That by definition of the float adjusted index methodology, there won't be such sudden shifts.
So the index would represent the returns which are much more
realizable.
Yes, realizable. Exactly. So, so one more question I have regarding now market closure methodology. Now, we all know that when the market plummets or drastically goes down, you have triggers where the stock market goes into market closures at different intervals. So now with the lower variation in the sort of the ASPI, is there any sort of change you're looking at in these closures, or are we going on with the same set of what kind of sensitivity are you expecting here? Yeah.
At the moment, we haven't considered anything like that. So that would remain as it is, as the current way. Currently, what we do is, as you know, there would be 3 market holds that is based on S&P SL20. If the S&P SL20 is down by 5% within a day, we impose a market hold. Then again, market, 3-level market holds that is based on S&P SL20. And usually when it comes to market holds, that is based on the blue chip index, because that's the largest and most liquid index, right? By definition, it is meant to be large and most liquid. And most cases, the market holds are based on the blue chip index. So that we haven't, most probably we won't change it. So I would say rather we haven't considered anything at the moment. At the moment, it will be as it is.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Nishant. I think we've covered all areas of the questions that we've got, and we've given a basically detailed understanding to the investors as to how the ASPI works and how the new methodology works, and what the investors should expect once this new methodology comes into effect in January, if I'm correct, Nishant,
Yeah.
it comes into effect on the 1st of January or at a 15th, is it? Or
Not 15. I took it for the argument's sake, but this should be somewhere in January, and we are yet to announce what the date is.
all right. Okay. So,
And Dimanta, one more thing I would like to share. Just before this presentation, I got a call from a colleague of mine and asking for the advantages and disadvantages. He's fairly, he is convinced with the advantages, but he was wondering whether there are disadvantages. Can I share my thoughts on that as well?
yes, definitely.
All right. Now, of course, advantages we discuss because it will be fairly, so we discourage the market manipulation attempts, not market manipulation, I'm sorry, index manipulation, because this won't address the market manipulation. Of course, index manipulation attempts we discourage, and the other one is, of course, this will give fairly realistic, sustainable returns. In terms of disadvantage, of course, within a market, of course, there will be disadvantage. For you to experience the disadvantage, of course, you want to be an international investor. Right? From a foreign investor's point of view, of course, then they would experience some sort of a disadvantage. Within the country, of course, there is no disadvantage at all. So what's the disadvantage that others would experience, the foreign investors would experience once they consider different markets? There could be some differences in the definitions. If a foreign investor considers Sri Lanka, India, and some other market, 3 markets, all 3 markets are based on, their calculations are based on float adjusted market cap. However, they would have definitely they would have their own 3 definitions, right? Sri Lanka has one definition, India would have one definition. Even within India, there would be NSE would have one definition, or Bombay Stock Exchange would have one definition. So then there would be sort of a comparison issue. And of course, for that also there is a solution. Solution is, of course, to use one definition. How do we use one definition? If we go by one index provider, of course, then they would apply same unique methodology, the definition of public holding across the board. Just an example, if we take S&P, if S&P indices are present in, say, in a couple of countries, all the countries are, those indices are comparable. Why? Because those are stemming down from the same definition. And so that in terms of disadvantage, we would have disadvantages in that regard if exchanges are using their own different definitions. Other than that, within the country, of course, investors are in very good shape, no disadvantage at all, and you have very decent 2 advantages, and you are much safer. Yeah, Dimanta.
Okay, thanks a lot, Nishant. So we've answered most of your questions, and I would like to now invite Nishant whether he would have any final comments regarding the revision. Yeah.
All right. One thing is, of course, you should not consider this as the introduction of new index. I repeatedly told that this is not introduction of a new index, and in my the short presentation as well as in my answering, I would have alluded as if we have one index. Of course, we have one index that is something developed for the impact analysis purpose. However, we are not launching a new index. We are not introducing a new index. We are simply revising the methodology. And we have done some revisions for ASPI methodology as well. One thing that we can remember is 2017. At 2017, June 19, we changed the methodology to incorporate all the non-voting shares. That day, we incorporated 17 non-voting shares to the index, 17 index, and thereafter, non-voting shares are also included to the ASPI. Right? That's a globally, all the stock exchange took a collective decision to consider non-voting shares also to market capitalization, and based on the WFE, World Federation of Exchange definition, and we also went ahead and included. So that's one revision. One revision, which we did 2017 June 19. Likewise, we are doing another revision in probably the end of this year, right, or early next year, to change the weighting scheme. Therefore, we should not be viewed as, you don't want to still, even thereafter, index name would be all share price index. Nothing, there won't be any adjective like float ASPI or nothing. Still, that would be ASPI. And so again, my appeal is to don't get confused. This should be considered, or this should be viewed as a methodology change. Index would remain same. That will continue from the same point that it stopped before launching. After launching, that will continue from that time. However, that will be calculated based on the revised methodology. That's what I have to share, Dimanta.
Thanks a lot, Nishant. So that concludes our Q&A session for the evening. So just a reminder that we've done a presentation during the evening where we explained why we are introducing this sort of index and what goes into it, and when it starts, and how the rebalancing happens. And then we touched in the Q&A session number of aspects, including the advantages and disadvantages, and a key thing continuously emphasized by Nishanta was that consider this for the ASPI index to be a continuing thing, and it's not an introduction of a new index. So it's only thing that will happen is that the methodology is going to change from January onwards, and most probably the third week of third Friday in line with the rebalancing plan. So basically with that, we would like to conclude our Q&A session and webinar. With this, we would like to thank all our viewers and the audience for joining with us for this session, and we've been continuing this for closer to an hour. So thank you for staying with us, and also thank you for throwing in your questions. We hope that we've answered all your questions and cleared your doubts regarding this revision that is taking place. Thanks a lot, everyone, and good night.
Thank you, Dimanta.
Okay, thanks.